Well, Alan, I think you were going to read us sort of the first part that the characters learned from Merrill in Cortirion.
That's right. So I'll go ahead and read that. Thus spoke Mandos in prophecy, when the Valar sat in judgment in Valinor, and the rumor of his word was whispered among all the elves of the west. When the world is old, and the powers have grown weary, Morgoth, the black foe of the world, seeing that the guard sleepeth, shall come back through the door of the night out of the timeless void. And all shall be darkness, for the sun he will turn to black, and the moon will no longer shed his light. But the host of Valinor shall descend upon him as a searing flame, white and terrible. Then shall the last battle be gathered on the fields of Valinor.
I really wish I could read like you. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
I wish I could read like him too.
Oh,
Well, in this, we learn. There's a few things that I pulled out of this for our adventure, right? So, so we learn lots of things, right? The first thing, one of the first things we learn is that the powers have grown weary,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then for the purposes of our adventures, the characters then had to do things to bring about the last battle because the Valar couldn't; they were weary.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of the Valar having grown weary, this is a really Germanic concept. This comes
Yes,
straight
it
out of
is.
Norse mythology, and there's an assumption that the Norse gods are immortal in the same way that, say, the Greek gods are. Things like that. They never die. They're forever young, and that is partly true. However, they have to go to great lengths to keep their youth. There's all
Mhm.
kinds of myths about like golden apples and things like that they have to eat so that they keep their
Yeah.
youth. And so,
Botox injections.
exactly that that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but so this idea of even the gods, little g gods, growing
Mhm.
weary is a very Germanic thing, and I think it's the first thing that, to me, as I sit and read this as somebody who's been playing around in world mythologies all my life, that to me is like, yep, that's straight
Yeah.
out of Norse myth, and I just think
Yeah, it is.
it's one place where Tolkien is really showing his influences.
Hmm. Well, let's go to the next part here, where it says that the guard sleepeth, and then that will allow Morgoth to come back through the door of night out of the
Yes.
timeless void.
I think honestly, I think the first thing I think of is, when you read the Silmarillion and you think, oh, took care of Morgoth, he's gone. And yeah, okay, Sauron's still around, but we'll deal with Sauron later. Well,
Right.
this reminds us that you can't get rid of Morgoth forever.
No.
And
Well,
that
he's an
reminds me,
Ainu. He's an
yeah,
offspring of the thought of Iluvatar. You can't
right,
destroy him any more than you can
right.
destroy the other Ainu. Yeah.
Exactly. And you can't even lock him out of creation forever. He will come back in. And that makes me think of stuff that we've been talking about in our last two seasons, Alan, with the Circle
Yeah,
of Light.
absolutely.
This idea, this,
The
again,
Beowulf
very
concept.
Germanic idea from Beowulf of the monsters are just waiting just
Mhm.
outside the gates, just outside the doors, just
They
outside
can
the
hear the
Circle of Light.
music in our halls. They can
And
hear the celebration, and that's
and it
making them want
makes
to come
them
after
mad.
us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so
They
it's
hear
just
our
that
party
reminder
and they're
that,
mad they weren't invited, but yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it's that reminder that Morgoth is eventually
Oh, yeah.
going to come back. Yeah.
Yes, he will.
Well, there's this other piece here that we're kind of glossing over, that the guard sleepeth, and the guard
I
is
know.
Thought about that.
obviously a reference to Arendelle, right? Then with the Silmaril.
I
Y-
maybe,
it-
maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, Eärendil is on patrol.
He's on patrol.
He,
That's
he,
true.
yeah.
But
So
who? But hmm.
I wonder though, because
I
I mean, come
see.
on,
Part of me wonders if
Eärendil can't make a mistake like that, guys.
no,
Come
of
on.
course not. Never. Uh, Here's the thing. He's outside in the timeless void at this point. My wonder is the guard that we're talking about on the inside of the door? And if so, how in the world does Morgoth knows he's asleep and therefore can come through the door? Or is there some sort of guard on the other side of the door of the night,
Hmm.
keeping watch over Morgoth? And that's the guard who's unnamed, unidentified, unimaginable, who is sleeping, and therefore Morgoth can then sneak out the door. I mean, it's almost like, is this jail guard on the inside of the cell or on the outside of the cell?
Well, you bring up jails, and it makes me think of Mandos, and I wonder,
I
you
wondered
know,
the same
we
thing.
know that Mandos
Could
looks
he be the
his
guard?
his halls look west, right?
Yeah.
Beyond the circles of the world. And maybe Mandos or somebody in Mandos's
Yeah, one of his
people.
charges. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe they're the ones who are watching this. I mean, that does it sort of goes with the first part of that sentence about the powers growing weary, right?
Hmm. Yes, it
So
does. Absolutely
so
does.
maybe it's the Valar, although it could be Eärendil. I don't know. It's tough. I like the idea that it's
Eärendil
one of the
moves
Valar
about
though.
though. I mean, he's on patrol, but he's not stationary.
That's true.
So
That is true.
I would tend to think that it's not him, that it is either one of the Valar themselves, like Mandos, or one of the Maiar that is set with that task.
Eärendil's a beat cop. He's not
Yeah, he's
stationed
not
anywhere
staking out
constant.
somebody, right?
So
Yeah.
And he's not on jail. He's not on guard duty.
That's
So
interesting, yeah.
the lay that we're going to hear a little bit later, obviously we took it from our story, the campaign story, and the way that
Sure.
I interpreted this, I borrowed on a line that we're going to read a little bit later about the Silmarils being essentially reassembled.
Mhm.
And so the way that I took this was that the guard was Eärendil,
Okay.
and that he would. If he sort of failed at his task somehow. And in
Uh-huh.
our story, it's that and Caligon comes back and gets revenge on him and knocks him out of the sky.
Oh
Um,
wow.
Wow.
uh,
Okay.
which yeah, I know it's a little far fetched, but anyway,
No,
so
it's cool.
the fact that he sort of came back to Earth, so to speak, with his Silmaril,
Mm.
sort of fit in
Mhm.
with the next part, right, where the Silmarils were obviously going to be found, and they were going to use them to rekindle the trees. But let's, Alan, you want to do part two?
Yeah, Sean's called dibs on part 3, so I've got this shorter part here, and this is where they learn part of the prophecy in the House of 100 Chimneys, right?
Right, from Gilfanon, correct.
Yeah. In that day, Tulkas shall strive with Morgoth, and on his right hand shall be Eonwe, and on his left Turin Turambar, son of Hurin, returning from the doom of men at the ending of the world. And the black sword of Turin shall deal unto Morgoth his death and final end. And so shall the children of Hurin and all fallen men be avenged. And
Uh,
I love that part of the story. The
Oh,
I
idea
do
that
too.
that is
Hurin
so great.
gets
So great.
back. Ah, love
Yeah,
it.
I mean, out of anyone in any of the
Yeah.
volumes, really, Turin got the short end of the
Boy,
stick.
he sure did. I
He
mean,
did.
granted, most of the time it's because he gave himself the short end of the stick.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, things really could have been better. And I love that, here's a guy who is tremendous combat prowess, right? He is a field general. He makes
Yeah.
mistakes like building a really big bridge to get an army across, but it's because he wants to fight. He's really good in fighting. And what do we know about Eonwe, right? The Valaquenta tells us that Eonwe is actually the mightiest in arms in
Right.
all of Arda. He's better than any of the Valar when it
right.
comes to fighting with
Right.
weapons. So Tulkas, who's the strongest and big bad wrestler dude, and then you've got the big bad, martial guy with the
The
swords in
swordsman.
Eonwe, and then
You
you've
know
got
what you know
Turin
what it's
Turambar
like?
with the
This is
weapons.
like Fezzik and Inigo Montoya,
Yeah,
right?
you're right. You're
Tulkas
absolutely
Tulkas
right.
is the big burly giant guy. He's the
Yeah,
grappler, right? And
yeah,
Eonwe is the swordsman, you know?
yeah. And then Turin, thankfully, is not Fazzini.
Fassini, yeah.
No.
No, we
No,
don't have a Fazzini here.
but Turin is probably the man in black, actually.
Oh, he really is the man in black.
Ah,
If
yes.
if Buttercup was Wesley's sister.
Oh. Oh.
Oh,
Too
man.
soon.
Oh, come on
Too
now.
soon. Too soon.
Sorry.
As you wish.
Yeah.
But in our story, Turin is the man in black. He so the whole sort of plot device that I use to bring back things like in Caligon and Turin
Mhm.
Turambar
Hmm.
is this Maiar that I called Gwarthaur, and
Hmm.
he had this ability to sort of bring people back from the dead, and that's how we got
Oh,
to meet
interesting.
all of these
Wow.
fantastic people. Yeah.
We know that's a
Wow.
lot more powerful than the genie in Aladdin.
Can't bring people back from the dead. It's not a pretty sight.
uh, so in the story here, Turin's terrible, ill-fated story continues, and in our story, Gwarthaur brings him back, and he brings back Mim the dwarf, Beleg
Oh, wow.
Cuthalion, and
Oh, Beleg's back.
and
Woohoo!
and Finwillas, the three people whom he ended up killing accidentally.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
and he also Gwarthaur brings back Glaurung, and Turin rides him into battle in the Pass of Light against the characters until he is freed of the spirit.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's trying to
whoa.
highlight to the characters what a just a terrible existence he's had, and
Oh, yeah.
and how he's
He
freed.
has.
And if going back to some of the stuff that we were talking about with Tolkien's intentions with this work, that quote from Verlin Flieger about how it came from Norse mythology and the biblical apocalypse.
Yeah.
This is where I feel like you're getting some of the biblical apocalypse stuff coming in. Well, and it's very much about righting wrongs, right? I feel like
Yeah,
the rest
that's what
of
it is.
this prophecy is very much about righting the wrongs of the world.
Mhm.
The world turned out badly the first time around. We're going to fix it. We're going to make it the way it was supposed to be from the beginning. That's baked
Yeah.
right into Ein
We're going to
Elendil.
get that in your reading, Sean, because that's
Yeah,
when we talk about what
yeah,
happens to Arda itself. But yeah, you're
yeah.
right. This
But
is
but
sort
you're
of that
starting to
Armageddon bit that
That's
the stuff.
absolutely
Yeah.
right. You're starting
Mhm.
to see that here because Turin, this guy who's made all these terrible mistakes, finally
Yes,
gets a chance to make it better,
to make it
right?
right. Now that I
And
think
I
about
love
it, we
it.
got a little bit of that in the last reading, though. The last battle being gathered on the fields of Valinor very much feels like the Battle of Armageddon,
Yeah.
and this sort of
That's
this
true. Yeah,
massive
yeah,
collection of
yeah. That's
armies.
true.
But yeah,
That's
you're
true.
right. This is definitely where we start to see the blend a little bit more here, a
Hmm.
little bit less Norse and a little bit more Judeo-Christian.
Yeah,
All right. Well, Sean, you want to do part 3?
yeah. Okay. So part 3 is the part of the prophecy that we learn from Idril in the Tower of Pearl.
Mm.
Thereafter shall the earth be broken and remade, and the Silmarils shall be recovered out of air and earth and sea. For Feanor shall surrender them willingly. Yavanna will rekindle the 2 trees, and a great light shall come forth. And the mountains of Valinor shall be leveled, so that the light shall go out over all the world. In that light the Valar will grow young again, and the elves awake and all their dead arise, and the purpose of Ilúvatar be fulfilled concerning them. But of men in that day the prophecy of Mandos doth not speak, and no man it names, save Turin only.
Ooh. Yeah, so we get a lot of nuggets out of that one, don't we?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
do. Yep.
so much again of that righting of wrongs. But Jared, I'll let you get us started.
Yeah, well, the things that I took out of this were that first of all, the Silmarils, we're gonna see all 3 of those again,
Hmm.
and that Feanor has learned his lesson,
Yeah, he
Yeah.
made a mistake the first time around, and now he's going to get a chance to do it right.
and I
Absolutely.
and I think that touches on the sort of righting of wrongs, right?
Hmm.
Feanor will surrender them willingly to Yavanna, and so
Hmm.
that they can rekindle the 2 trees. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so this part for us in the campaign, I called this part the trials of the Valar, right? The
Yeah.
Valar being weak and weary, the characters had to do all of these things. They had to go find a Malor nut and a sapling of Nimloth. They had to
Oh, cool.
reforge the chain that bound Morgoth. They
Mm.
had to refill the wells of Varda, and they had to sort of assemble all 3 Silmarils, so that all of these things in the prophecy could come to be. You know,
That's super cool, and I love the idea of um, giving
Hmm.
people, elves, men, the children of Ilúvatar, giving people a chance to take a part in that, as opposed to just like you said, the Valar are weary, so
Yeah.
we're gonna have to do it for
Except
them.
for Tulkas, he's never weary.
no, I
Sorry.
was just thinking about that actually. Yeah.
Tulkas, man. No, no,
When
no,
he
no,
is,
no.
he sleeps. Do do
Well
we want to
played.
talk a little bit more about Eärendil here, because I actually have
Mhm. Well,
an
you always
interesting
want
thought
to
about
talk more
this.
about
I
Aaron.
do. That's true. I do.
Yes, please,
Because
please.
because as we're talking about the Silmaril, specifically the Silmaril that's going to be recovered out of air. So, looking at one of the many versions of this text in the history of Middle Earth, Tolkien writes that Eärendil shall descend and surrender that flame which he hath had in keeping.
Yeah.
And I have an interesting thought about this because, uh, as we said a moment ago, we haven't had a chance to talk about this on our show with any of our guests. But I did have a chance to talk to Corey Olson about this story at TexMoot earlier this year. So TexMoot is one of the regional moots that Signum University does all over
Mhm.
the world, actually.
Yeah.
And this one was in Texas in February, right before all the moots started going online, back when we
Yeah.
could still meet in person.
Yeah.
And Corey was talking about the Dagor Dagorath, and of course I had to raise my hand and say something about Eärendil, and he said, "Well, what I think is going on here is Eärendil surrendering the Silmaril is actually him finally getting to rest from his labors."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we talk about, if we read, whether you want to read the version of Eärendil's story that Bilbo tells in the Hall of Fire in many meetings, or if you want to go back to the version that's in the Silmarillion, there's always this idea of Eärendil accepting this burden to carry the Silmaril and to patrol the skies. And he accepts this burden. He totally accepts it willingly, but at the same time, it's a tremendous sacrifice for him, because he would love to come back to Middle Earth. He would love to come back and see people again. He'd love to return to his home, and he can't do that. And one of the things that I've started to think about with this passage after talking to Corey about this is, this to me is another righting of a wrong. This is not that it was wrong for Eärendil to accept this burden, because it was right and it was a tremendous sacrifice that he did, but now there's not as much need for him to do it. There's no need for him to do it now, because it's the last battle now. He can lay down his burden and he can finally rest. And so to me, this is another righting of a wrong. I know you had a different take on it, Jared, but that's
Oh
sort
yeah.
of how I
No,
read
this is
this.
fantastic. And I'm looking at the Dagor Dagorath in a totally different way now. I mean, I'm seeing closure all around.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, and that's, well, credit to Corey Olson with with publicly schooling me on that one. But yeah, I think it's I think it's a fantastic insight.
We have been publicly schooled by a number of these Tolkien scholars.
We have,
Boy,
so many times.
Dr. Flieger embarrassed me this last week for sure. Twice, actually. Once on the show in the recording, and then once I asked her a question after her keynote. And I forgot the one thing you got to remember when you talk to Dr. Flieger. Never assume you can ask her a question and she won't
She'll
ask you
always
one
ask
back.
you one
Oh,
back.
totally. Yeah.
Because I got distracted by somebody in Slack. The way MythMoot worked digitally is we were in GoToWebinar watching the talks, and then we were simultaneously in Slack chatting back and forth with other attendees. So I got distracted with a Slack conversation as she was starting to answer my question, and she asked me a question, and I didn't know it. And the next thing I hear is, that wasn't a rhetorical question. I'm like, oh God,
no.
oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed.
Oh no.
She is
You know
awesome.
what? Honestly,
She's
it
awesome.
didn't sound as bad to everybody else as it did to you. I heard it. It
Well,
wasn't
that's because it was
sound-
Dr. Flieger. That's the kind of thing that you stay up nights thinking about afterwards.
Believe me,
That's true.
I did. I was
Oh, man.
mortified.
That's true.
Well, let me take us on to. I'm already convinced that this episode is going to be a two-parter.
I think that's obvious now, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well, let me read the part that I embellished a little bit, and I pulled a lot of this out of the published Silmarillion. And the characters. This is the very last part that they learned from the Vanyar king in Ilmarin. The great music of the Ainur will make together with the children of Iluvatar in the end of days will be more splendid than the first music of the Ainur, as the children will participate, and every participant will fully understand the intent of their part and be in harmony with the others.
Yeah.
Iluvatar will give to them the secret fire.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so it was a conglomeration of things from the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
But it was a nice kind of ending to the prophecy.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it echoes some of the themes that we've been talking about, right? It talks about the righting of wrongs, the closure, as you put it, and sort of the doing it right this time. The mistakes were made. Mistakes were made.
Mistakes were made. That is so true.
Something starts with Mel and ends with core. Something core.
Yeah.
But now we're getting a chance to do it right, and everybody's going to take part. And
yes.
And I like the idea that, it's kind of open-ended here, that it could be all the children of Iluvatar, not just the elves.
There will be. Yeah.
Maybe not just the elves and men. Maybe the dwarves have a part in this too.
Maybe. I mean, they are Iluvatar's children. They're just the children.
They're his adopted children.
Children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I know I remember reading somewhere that the dwarves believed that they will play a part in remaking Arda after
they
the
do
last.
believe that.
I think that's in.
But they will serve Ali. That's of Ali and Yavanna, I
right?
believe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So guys, we have so I as a way to end this 3-year journey, I decided that I needed to write a lay, sort of the way that the Lay of Lathian was written. Although,
If you say so, sir.
yeah, I
Shawn, if
won't.
you expect me to write
Yeah,
any sort of poetry for the end of the Prancing Pony podcast, just disabuse yourself of that notion right now.
Well, let's not talk about the end of the Prancing Pony podcast. All right, let's just keep that going. The road goes ever on, you know.
All right.
But
all
so
right.
so anyway, so I decided to write this lay, and I broke it into I broke it into sections. Sort of the way of the Lay of Lathian is written. It's much more abbreviated, but I tried to sum up everything that happened in the campaign while tying in parts of the Dagor Dagorath. And it was in writing this that I discovered more to my story. And I think you guys want to ask some questions before we play the lay?
I actually do have a question, yeah, because
Mhm.
obviously we've seen in Tolkien's version of the story, obviously Turin plays a huge part in it. He definitely plays a part in your lay, as we'll see in a moment. But I want to ask you a little bit about this image of the sister swords.
Yeah.
So,
Sure, sure.
in the very first stanza, you mentioned sister swords of malice. Towards the end, I think we're looking at the third to last stanza here of the Silmarils and of Iron Fire. We see
Oh,
that
yeah. Yeah.
the smiths of old, black blades expire, are forged as one, now iron fire. So
Yeah.
if I'm reading this correctly, I'm seeing that there are these two swords that are somewhat opposed to each other throughout the lay, and then they're brought together as one. Now, when we talk about two swords, and because my brain is on Turin, because we've been talking about the Dagor Dagorath, I'm thinking immediately of Anglachel
Angel.
or Gurthang
Sure.
and Anguril. I just
Anguero.
Anguril,
Angro.
yeah,
Yeah.
the two
Yes.
swords
Ale.
that were made by
Ale
Ale.
sword.
So
Yeah.
that's actually really that's a really great point, and it is the thing that I discovered as I was writing this. What I discovered in my story was that that the swords were going to play sort of the central piece of this lay, and
Okay.
in our campaign, it was the campaign was focused on the first part of the campaign was focused on it was in the Third Age, but they found this old ritual that a Numenorian had sort of written up that was called I think we called it Pterodon's Wager. The Pterodon's Wager was that if they could assemble all of these pieces together, that they could find their way across the straight road.
Oh wow.
And so the idea was that somehow Morgoth had tainted that ritual to bring about his second coming or third coming, depending on how you want to call it.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so,
Yeah.
in writing the lay, and to sort of summarize this, I took us all the way back to the First Age, where the smith Eol forges the two black blades of malice,
Hmm.
and so if I could read a little bit of the first stanza that we'll hear in a second, from darkest night in broken chain. I'm alluding to obviously Morgoth and the Void, having
Right.
escaped his binding. The black foe sent the iron rain. I was referring to the sort of the meteorite containing the black swords.
Hmm.
In stardust wooded dell, into the stardust wooded dell, excuse me, is
Ah,
an
so
Elmoth.
that's Nan Elmoth. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The sisters' swords of malice dwell, and that's exactly how the Silmarillion
Yeah.
describes. They say that the swords have a bit of the malice of their
Right. Right.
crafter in them, but I take it a little bit deeper there that they've been sent from Morgoth himself, and yet through an age they leave all thought except that of the giver's plot, and that's of course Anatar.
Okay.
He sort of places this idea in Noldor Smith, which would be the Smith of Celebrimbor, where the
Right.
characters
Right.
Right. Right. Okay.
The
find
Gwaithir. The Gwaithir Mirdine. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So to issue fourth prophetic myth. So that's the sort of the Dagor Dagorath. So yes. So the
Cool.
swords. That's a really good point. The swords, in some ways, Morgoth is the instrument of his own undoing. So the swords,
Hmm.
Anglachel obviously gets reforged as Gurthang, and
Hmm.
is broken and is in. We think maybe Tol Morwen, right?
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
and then Anguarel sort of falls out of history,
Right.
and we lose track of it. But
Right.
in our story, sort of the good guys, the Fellowship of Light, find Angwarel, and they serve, and it sort of serves good. And this Gwarthour creature comes back and
Okay.
reforges Gurthang. And so in at the passive light, eventually Turin and the characters end up battling each other, and the sisters' swords hit each other and explode. And
Mm.
and the passage that you read is where they're reforged as one. And I found this, I struggled so much with what am I going to call this reforged sword? Because we know at the end, Turin has to deal the final blow with this black blade, right? It didn't say which black blade, so I sort of took some liberties there. And I found this term that Tolkien was going to use for something else, and it was this idea, this word called Angruin, which
Mm-hmm.
has the same root as Angwarel and Anglahel.
Right.
Oh, it's
Um,
iron. Yeah.
Iron
iron,
fire, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. And so that's where the name of this lay comes from. So that was a very good point. Thank you for bringing that
Very
up.
cool. Well, and then I'm glad that I picked up on that image since it is so central to the poem. And I
Right.
what I love about the swords being reforged as one at the end is it just seems to deliver on that theme of righting of wrongs or
Right.
closure that we were
Exactly.
talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got these two swords of malice that have done all sorts of bad things
Just
Oh,
ask Village.
in the hands of Turin and in the hands of
Oh well.
Aehol and
Yeah.
Miglin,
Yeah.
and yeah, so now they come together and they become the sword that deals the death blow to Melkor. I think there's a brilliant poetic closure to that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. There's a
nicely
nice
done.
circle there.
all right. Well, Shawn and Alan, thank you again so much for coming on this journey with us.
Mm.
It's lived up to everything that I knew it would be.
Well,
Um,
good. I'm glad.
and
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it really has been our
It's been a
pleasure.
lot
We've
of fun.
enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
I just want to encourage my listeners. I'm sure my listeners are also your listeners, but if they haven't checked out the Prancing Pony, please, 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 you will so much enjoy it.
We hope so. Yes.
I'm really looking forward to the next season. Is there something you want to? Can you give us a little preview of that?
Well, we're moving on to a new volume, right? We finished Fellowship of the Ring. It took us 2
Finished
years to
Fellowship.
get through
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And so now we're on to the Two Towers. And so for an entire season, there will be no Sam or Frodo, well, except in our Meanwhile Elsewhere in Middle Earth segments.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
we'll be looking over the hedge to see what
oh,
they're up
yeah,
to a few
we
times.
will. Yeah, checking things
But
out on
it's
the other
mostly
side of
going
the
to
Angruin.
be Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli,
Yeah.
some guy named Ao something.
Yeah.
Eomer, I think, the Lord of the.
Lord of the
Well,
something.
Theoden is still the Lord of the Mark at this point.
Yeah,
but
that's true. The eventual Lord of the Mark.
yeah.
Yeah, we're looking forward to meeting the Rohirrim. We're looking forward to
Yes.
meeting Treebeard. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
15 episodes. No,
Just to get through the Treebeard
yeah,
dialogue.
we're gonna have to do short dialogue passages when we choose to read that because those will
Yeah,
take
I know.
forever. It's gonna be great. We're gonna get to see Gandalf 2.0. We're gonna get to
Saruman. We
do
got Saruman coming up, and
yeah.
we got so much
I've
great
got to
stuff
come
to
up
talk
with
about with
voices
them.
for Saruman, voices for
Yeah.
Treebeard, voice for Theoden.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fun.
The
Well,
good
guys,
thing about Saruman is that you just have to live up to Christopher Lee.
Oh, shut up.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm not even going to take that approach. I haven't decided what I am going to do, but I've decided what I'm not going to do, and that's try to emulate Christopher Lee.
Oh, guys. Well, thank you again so much for the listener. I'm going to leave them with the Lay of Angruin.
Thank you so much.
It's a beautiful piece. They're going to enjoy every bit of it.